Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to another video. Today's topic, what I want to talk about is how we can finesse having a spiritual experience. You know, I know there's so many seekers out there. There's people seeking enlightenment. There's people that are very interested in spirituality. There are people that are sort of still waiting to have a non-dual experience to confirm the truth and the reality of that which they've been studying or have read, but it's still sort of frustrated that they've never had any sort of a spiritual experience. So I thought what would be a great video topic is sharing 5 techniques that could help us to finesse having that spiritual experience that we're all looking for. So the first technique I want to talk about is letting go of wanting to have a spiritual experience. So why is this so important? Because the very second we desire something, the very second we want something, we are energetically stating to the universe that we are separate from that. So anytime we want or desire a spiritual experience, we tend to keep it away. And when we let go of wanting to have a spiritual experience, we tend to invite it towards us. So I think in the Zen teaching of Huang Po kind of talked about this. He said, you know, the Buddha nature is sort of like, chasing the sunlight. Like, the very second you chase it, it seems to be very far away. But the very second you turn your back on the sunlight, it's, you can feel the heat of it on your back. So, or it's like the warrior who was searching for the jewel on his helmet. He was searching for it around the whole world and not realizing that it was on his helmet all along. Or there was a story in Buddhism that talks about, finding the relief, finding the source of suffering. And if you get shot with a poisoned arrow, you could spend your whole life looking for the guy who shot you with the arrow instead of just removing the arrow right then and there. So to let go of wanting to have a spiritual experience tends to invite it towards us. And the way that I practice this in my own life is I ask myself the question, sort of like a squeezing the lemon question. Could I be okay with the fact of never, ever, ever having a spiritual experience ever again? And the more I could say yes to that response, the more I sort of reach a state of imperturbability. I reach a state of contentment, a surrendered state in which, whether a spiritual experience happens again, great. And if it doesn't, that's fantastic also. So I'm non-attached at that point. The second technique I want to talk about is aligning oneself with a primary spiritual teacher. So we all sort of go through a phase of endless searching in the beginning, but I think it's important to realize that, the curiosity of the ego and this endless searching eventually has to come to an end. Because the ego's basic dictum is to seek and never find. So eventually we want to align ourselves with a primary teacher, and we want to confirm that this primary teacher that we align ourselves with is indeed actually enlightened. Because what the enlightened teacher provides the student is that high energy carrier wave that activates the student's higher spiritual bodies and makes a spiritual experience, increases the likelihood of that spiritual experience happening. If you're studying a teacher who's not truly enlightened, that's just had a high spiritual experience like a Satori, but isn't actually enlightened, I think the chances of having a spiritual experience studying their teachings is going to be more rare. So we want to confirm that the teacher that we are studying is actually enlightened, and to align ourselves with that primary teacher and teachings. Eventually we feel called and resonated to about a half a dozen spiritual techniques, and we apply those 6 spiritual techniques around the clock. So it's very much the same, like Nisargadatta Maharaj once said, that the way we find water is not by digging dozens of holes all over our backyard. If you dig dozens of shallow holes, you're never going to find water. But if you dig one very deep hole, eventually you hit water. So I think having a spiritual experience is very much like that. It's taking a few techniques that you feel resonate, you feel aligned with, and using those techniques around the clock, day in, day out. Every moment you're surrendering, or letting go, or forgiving, or living in the stop frame of each instant. So that brings me to the next technique I want to share. And in my own life, a lot of spiritual experiences always came about from living in the stop frame of each instant. So a lot of times when I was sort of walking that razor's edge, as the Upanishads calls it, and Dr. David Hawkins also calls it, it's not anticipating the moment that's about to happen, and it's not clinging to whatever just occurred. So you're living in the stop frame of each instant, and you're sort of constantly turning this moment over to God. So it's very much like the flashlight in a dark room. You know, your awareness is only shining on that which the light is lighting up at that exact instant. So I don't know what it is about this, you know, walking the razor's edge that's so powerful, but it tends to bring on a feeling of timelessness. And I would presume that when one lives in the stop frame of each instant, there's no room for a personal self to exist in there. So there's no room for a personal I in that space. My daughter's in here again. Thank you, honey. So to live in the stop frame of each instant tends to invite that spiritual experience into one's life. Another technique I want to share is acting as if you already are the self with a capital S. So what does this mean exactly? It's sort of like mimicking the self with a capital S. What have we read about it? What have we heard about it? Well, we've heard that it's infinite. We've heard that it's formless. We've heard that it's the infinite context. We've heard that, you know, people that have, you know, people that are the self with a capital S report it being the feeling of being one with everything and yet being no thing at the same time. So I think as if we mimic being the self with a capital S, you know, pretend that you already are all that exists. You know, act as if you are at one with the universe. Act as if you are already feeling complete and total at all times. You know, really sit there, you know, when you sit down and meditate, welcome the feeling of what it feels like to have it all, to be it all. You know, imagine having absolutely no desires or fears, and welcome that feeling of having no desires or fears. So I think when we mimic the self with a capital S and its attributes, we again tend to invite that into our lives. You know, we invite that experience into our lives. And then lastly, what I want to talk about is aligning oneself with consciousness levels 500 and over. So this is what I talked about in another video, which is the process of entrainment. So when we constantly expose our consciousness to consciousness levels 500 and above, we're sort of like a tuning fork, you know. All the music you listen to, you're listening to like lots of classical music, spiritual music. I like Robert Gass, which is, he's got that song Kyrie and Alleluia. There's some other music I like is, I think her name is pronounced Ime Oi, and they play a lot of her music at the Buddha Relics. The Buddha Relic Tour used to travel around North America, and the Buddha Relic energy field calibrated in the low 900s. And there was a group of us that used to attend the Buddha Relics all the time just to bask and sort of meditate. And I like Celtic women, I like river dance. So, you know, sort of exposing one's consciousness to these higher energy fields of music. You know, the Beatles calibrate pretty high. I want to say like in the high 400s. You know, exposing one's consciousness to beautiful movies, music, and reading the highest spiritual literature that we have. You know, you're sort of studying the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Holy Bible. You're reading the Zen teachings, the Huangpo, of Bodhidharma. You know, you're reading high energy or high calibration material, and then you're also practicing spiritual concepts and practices. And I also think meditating on the image of your teacher, whether it's Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Dr. Hawkins, Huangpo, you know, Nisargadatta Maharaj or Ramana Maharshi, when we meditate on the image of the teacher right before drifting off to sleep at night, I think through consciousness calibration, it's proved that, you know, you're sort of tapping into that teacher's energy auric field. So by constantly exposing one's consciousness to the higher calibrations in life, you know, again, you're sort of setting your consciousness up for a spiritual experience to happen. So anyways, I thought these were 5 great little techniques that one can utilize in their own life if they were really wanting to have this spiritual experience. And I thought it was worth mentioning to sort of, you know, help people having those experiences in their own life so they could confirm the truth and the reality of that which they're reading and studying. So anyways, thanks for listening, guys. Hope you have a great day. Take care.